Hello, sir.
Hello, how are you?
Good morning. I'm very, very busy.
Oh,
I'm kind of busy that makes you stressed.
okay.
But
Sorry
yeah.
to hear that.
Yeah. I had no time to prepare, even though it's my day. It's maybe my last day for a while.
Oh, you're that busy.
Well, no, in this case, no, not like that. I'll keep trying to make time, but this may be my last. Well, let me put it this way: my boss scheduled a weekly meeting at this time, starting next week. So I had to figure that out.
Okay. Well, maybe we could move this. I don't know if
Yeah.
it's
That's an option, or maybe I can push back and say, let's schedule a different time. I've been doing this for years without mentioning to my work colleagues that this time is reserved. I've just been kind of getting around it.
I understand
But
perfectly.
yeah, but
Hi, Carl.
I'll think about what I'm gonna do. Hey, Carl.
Okay.
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah, pretty good.
I was away for a few days on vacation, so I'm kind of recuperating for vacation. Too much fun. Don't have much more to offer new now because I was not working, but I'm in a good mood.
Where were you?
Oh, just Ottawa, but we lived there for a while, so we have tons of friends. So it was like 3 social appointments a day, pretty much, for 4 days.
Nice.
Yes. Ottawa is not thought of as an exciting city, and it isn't, but because there's people moving all the time from all over, it means that you can make new friends because people are not already in a network. I think it's really interesting about, they say can be a property of big cities, but it can also be a property of small cities if there's a reason why people move in and out a lot.
Makes sense.
That was definitely a small town. Otherwise. Hi, Stephen. So Felix said he'd be late, so I think we're closer to quorum.
All right. Yeah, I didn't have time to prepare for today, but I have 2 subjects we could talk about. The main one would be continuing with the definitions, disambiguation, design discussions, because there's definitely some interesting things going on there, and some things that came up regarding our definitions process as well, or rather some insight that came from the definitions process itself. The second thing would be kind of continuing the side conversation Stephen and I had in that thread, but I think that's less interesting right now. Maybe we should go. It has to do with how do you reconciling people having their own view of their own contributions versus having a central repository that's deduped and all that.
Obviously interests me, but yes.
Yes, obviously interests you. And I think I know your take. My guess would be your take is to have it federated. Each person has their own view, and then you do work to reconcile, synthesize, or.
But it does mean, like, when you say work, it does mean materializing the conflict. And that's really the non-trivial part. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. We can come back to that another time, I think. What I wanted to do was maybe keep talking about definitions. When the three approaches I've seen so far from this as kind of either proposed or used within this group is one, using external definitions like a knowledge graph. And there's a lot of gaps in that kind of approach. Two, just entering your own definition. That's actually implemented in debate map, but it'd just be a text definition. That doesn't, in the way it's implemented there, contain any relationship between definitions. It's just sort of, someone will make up a definition and say, this is what I mean by this word. And then you can tag it on any words. And obviously we can see more sophisticated ways of doing that. And the third one, I find very intriguing, but also very complex, and I'm not sure if it's manageable, would be the definitional claims approach, right? Which to some degree, well, I don't know. I don't know if somebody maybe wants to take a stab at explaining better or even defining definitional claims. We've kind of danced around it, but maybe if somebody has a concise explanation.
That's actually an interesting question. And I certainly like the idea of experimenting with this notion of definitional claim. So my, maybe not so terse, but one thing I've used as a, how do you know that a claim is definitional, is that if this claim is not true about this entity, it's not a new empirical fact about the named entity, it means that we're not talking about the same kind of entity. Like the definitional claim, okay, so definition applies to a name. The name defines a class of entities, or an individual entity, of course, but let's assume it's a class. And if an entity does not fit that definition, it does not fit that name, pretty much.
What is a claim here, and what is a? I mean, can you bring this back to like concrete cases?
Or maybe I should call it a predicate. Okay, so well, the good example, the classic, sorry, I'll go Linnean, is mammals have glands that produce milks to feed their babies, right? If it doesn't have,
no, but is a definite. What is a definitional claim here? Because you're already jumping ahead to talk about properties. Is a definitional claim a claim?
A definitional claim is a claim, or maybe I should call it, well, okay. First, it's a predicate. Okay, it's saying, has milk producing glands. And the claim, hello, Felix. The claim here is all mammals have milk producing glands. That's the claim form of the predicate, but it's a definitional claim because this is not an empirical fact about mammals. It's a part of what defines a mammal. If it doesn't have milk glands, well, it's not a mammal. As opposed to, we haven't discovered platypus yet, and empirical claim, all mammals give live birth. And then that turned out to be false when we saw platypus laying eggs. That's the empirical part. Now it could have been, it's interesting in this case because we could have decided otherwise. We could have decided that what we thought was definitional was actually the live birth and the milk producing was empirical. I mean, either way, we had to destructure, and we could have chosen to destructure arbitrarily one way or another. But it turned out we decided that the milk producing part was the definitional part. And you say, okay, it's still the definitional part, and it's still how we will attach entities to the name.
I'm sorry, but all this makes me more confused as to what definitional claim might be than clarifying, to be honest. I mean,
okay, let me try again. Is anybody else confused? I'm
not confused. I'm reflecting on the circular nature of this all. Right?
Okay.
Just because let me give you an example of the circular nature. Let's say we're debating climate change is caused by humans, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, we're debating about, you would expect the debate to be about scientific evidence that shows,
And that would,
not-
I would
it
call
is or
that
isn't.
an empirical claim, yes.
and yet at some point you can say the same thing, that, well, if you say that climate change is not caused by humans, then we're talking about different things here.
You could, and yeah, and there's something absolutely, definitions are, there's always a degree of arbitrariness in how things are named. Like right now, we have the name climate change for climate change in general, and anthropogenic climate change for climate change caused by humans. And caused by human is empirical for climate change and definitional for anthropogenic climate change, right? Whereas it could have been the other way around. We could have decided arbitrarily climate change always means anthropogenic, and the non-anthropogenic is climate cycles, for example. And that's a perfectly valid way to choose how to attribute meaning to words. And so there is a part of arbitrariness, but what I'm saying is there is, for a given way to attribute meaning to words, when we attribute meaning to words, we're saying, well, the way I'm defining climate change, for example, I'm deciding to only speak about anthropogenic climate change. So the way I'm using it, caused by humans, is definitional. Whereas somebody else will say the way I'm using climate change, I'm including climate cycles, anthropogenic climate change is a separate thing, and hence climate change is caused by human is an empirical claim.
So is this for you a semantic or a when you use these terms, are you referring to like something you label in circumstance it's being used? So you're referring to something you want to support in the system, or because I'm a bit unclear on who decides whether it's definitional or not in your whole explanation you just gave.
The community using the word. What I'm saying is a community creates a vocabulary. And for that community, yes, I want to support that in the system, is saying, yes, this is part of my definition of the word. Anything that doesn't fit my definition of the word. And that means it's to avoid name drift. Like, we often give the example of what does socialism mean, right? It's precisely saying, well,
we understand the need for definitions. I don't think that's a problem. It's more like, I think I asked a fairly simple question before. A definitional claim, is it a claim? And then I got an answer of 5 minutes. So I'm more wondering, is a definitional claim a claim according to you, or is it something different?
I'm saying
it's not a base claim, or rather it's not, not by the definition of base claim. There's nothing about it. It's
I think it is. It can
not a base claim.
It should
It's
be.
not a base claim.
What is a base claim?
Because a base claim is something upon which in the definition one can agree or disagree.
Nope. There can still be ambiguity in a base claim. There's no reference to anything outside.
There's ambiguity in terms of your understanding of the claim, but you can't, in a base claim, you can agree or disagree. And in a definitional claim, I think it's accepted as an assumption or a given.
You can also disagree with definitions.
Yep, exactly.
But it's not a definition. A definitional claim is not a definition.
It's part of a definition. It's what's a definitional claim? It's a claim that you say this claim is not empirical. It's part of my definition of this word. So there's kind of two claims in there, but the main one is the way I'm using this word means that this is part of the definition. That's the claim. Is it a claim? Well, it could be. Okay, the problem is it can be formulated as a claim in the sense that all X are Y, or all X have feature Y. But it's, in this case, it's not a true or false claim. This is the way I'm using the word X.
But when you say it's not a true or false claim, I don't think you're adopting the definition of true or false that we use for other claims, in which it's like you can agree or disagree with it, because you can agree or disagree with it, right? You can agree or disagree with all X or Y. So in
Yes,
that sense, it's
absolutely.
exactly the same. But
Yeah,
you're
well,
talking about a different form of true and false in this case. You're talking about
absolutely true. Absolutely correct. It's a different form. What I'm saying is it has the form of a claim, but here I'm saying I'm not using it as a claim, but I'm using it as a definition. But it still has the form of a claim because for another definition of the word, it could be an empirical claim. And it could be a claim. The same sentence could be a claim for another definition of the word. But in this case, I'm saying I'm not using it as a claim, I'm using it as a definition.
Yeah. Felix.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wondered if, like, because Marc-Antoine said, okay, this community has this vocabulary and they have their own definitions. So, but as a claim, we always said it's something I can agree or disagree with in general. But if the definition only belongs to that community, I cannot really disagree with it in general because this word is defined like this in that community and like this in the other community. And it's not something that can be said to be true or false. No?
No. I think the fact that I'm saying definitions are community local, that's true of all bloody claims. All claims use words which have community local definitions. So all agreement is always community local with the community local definitions. That's not specific to this. This is just a generic statement about all claims and all sentences that I was drawing attention to.
Okay, that means
There's a separate.
I'm sorry. Yeah, that means that agreement is local, community local. Always. Okay.
Always, because it's always dependent on definitions. But good for raising it.
I don't know why you call it community local as opposed to individual local, right?
Well,
because
I mean, I understand that words take meanings according to communities and common uses, but each individual may have their own take on that community's use of the word, right? They may have heard it used wrong all the time or whatever. I think the community is going a little too far in that yes, or not far enough. Each individual is going to have their own meaning from what they say.
Fair enough. But still, there's a sense in which a purely individual definition will not have the same weight as a community definition, as a definition that's used by a community. But point taken otherwise, you're right.
There's obviously an infinite regression nature of this, which is that you're somehow using words to define other words, and then what are the definition of those words, and I think that's going to be a design problem where you have to come up with some compromise there.
Hello language.
Yeah,
I mean, that's fine. The dictionary also defines words in terms of other words. This circular nature is fine.
I think in one sense I'm okay with like I could design something around a definition is, I don't know the technical terms you want to use for all of this. It's a set of statements, I don't know if they're all declarative statements or what, but it's a series of assumptions that you make that are not to be debated, that to explain that word.
The reason I'm also interested in definitional claims is that if you have two conflicting definitions for a word, I expect there is a claim to distinguish them. Like all things that follow this first definition have a property, share a property that is not true of things that follow the second definition in many cases.
So
that's a claim. That's a strong claim. That's a strong claim, but I believe it to be generally true.
I mean, you don't disagree with an assumption, right? So if
disagreeing
all
with the
mammals,
assumption
no,
is
but
disagreeing with the definition. It's saying I don't want to use the word in that sense, but in that sense, it's not disagreeing with it. This is not a fact definition.
Right.
It's about negotiating word usage.
But so here's a question: is do all these definitional claims have the form of A is B?
That is a question.
Are they, as you said a different way, attributes, or are there other definitional claims that can go into this that don't take that form? Because the claims you want to debate are much more complex, but can any of those complex ones become a definitional claim just because you disagree with this one? So I'm going to create my own definition.
Yeah, I suspect they can all be put in the A is B form or some, compound thereof. That's a hypothesis. I haven't found counterexamples, but that's an empirical point. I'm not sure, but I suspect it's true until a counterexample is found. I have looked for it and not found one, but I have not looked enough, to be honest.
So that then you come up with the potential, which I wouldn't want to see in practice, but we might have to deal with it, of creating definitions that are inherently oxymorons, right?
Yep, that's a possibility. Hopefully those will be detected and rejected.
Yeah, because also A is not B is another form of A is B, right? So you could have A is B and A is not B assigned
Correct.
to the same definition, and then you're
it's
got a problem.
That's why it's important to see whether or not people adopt those definitions, which is indeed whether or not people agree with them, and those are real discussions that happen.
Yeah. One would hope that a definition that has an internal logical contradiction will be pointed out and rejected. Not always true, but, but
and that's why for me they are claims, and I want to represent them as such, and they'll probably be compound claims like a consensus, because it's a collection of attributes indeed, which probably is a collection of declarative statements.
But how do you represent?
Then if you disagree with any of these, that you shouldn't be discussing the claim in the first place because you don't agree with the definitions.
I mean, I guess the claim is really this definition is a valid and useful definition, is the claim.
No, it's a compound like Mercant says, like all mammals have milk glands. Do you agree with that or not? If you don't agree with that, then if that's the definition adopted in a claim that used the word mammals, then you shouldn't start arguing, oh, but this animal has no milk glands or whatever, something along those lines.
I feel that muddies the waters of the claim you're trying to debate when you let people go and debate the definition. My goal of having definitions is to resolve according to one definition, and you can have a second debate on your definition.
But I think you misunderstand it. It doesn't muddy it. It clarifies that if you disagree with that definition, then that's where the debate should go. You shouldn't debate about the claim. If you don't have a place to move that debate,
what if we have a definition of mammals that includes the milk, the breastfeeding part, right? Producing milk part. And you have a much more important claim, interesting claim about mammals that I can't think of one right now that has larger repercussions, and somebody doesn't want to face that repercussion, and so they go and take issue with the milk thing, and they undermine the other debate because they've moved the debate into whether or not all mammals produce milk, even though it's irrelevant to the claim that's actually being discussed.
Does it mean that the wrong definition is being used and that you should use a more generic word for a mammal in that case? I mean, it sounds like at that point you want to split up that claim into another one that doesn't allow discussion about, well, that doesn't require assuming that definition if that's not what you want to do.
But I think that if they're moving the discussion this way, being able to say, you may be muddying the original definition is a valid argument to make. and being able to refer to the definition is useful. Now, it's interesting because I was thinking about, oh, mammals not that interesting because there's only one claim there. Actually, there's two claims. It's the fact that they're milk producing and that it's a clade, that it's a monophyletic group. So if someone found a species descended from mammals that didn't produce milk, we'd have to revise our definition, or vice versa, or a something in another clade that produced milk, we'd have to. Well, I think.
But what does it mean even to find a species like from the same gene? I mean, because at a certain point it's defined by those properties. So that's exactly at that point you have an interesting debate about whether or not it's a mammal or not.
Exactly.
Even just real quick question. You had said, I was hoping maybe we could find where you draw the line, because I think you agreed that like the difference between Paris, Texas and Paris, France, there's no use arguing on the definition of Paris. So when does it move to you define it and split the debates, and when do you say we don't split the debates and we argue about the definition? Or am I misinterpreting?
Who are you asking?
You.
Well, wherever the disagreement lies, if there is a disagreement, that's where the debate moves. If there's disagreement on whether or not Paris should be one thing or another, you split it up. It depends on the person making the argument, where they want to make the arguments. If they want to make a more specific argument, they move it to a more specific discussion. If they want to argue the definition, they argue. I mean, that's the whole point. They go wherever the disagreement lies.
So yeah, so my base opinion right now is that the system should allow that feature, where in the past I've kind of said it shouldn't. I would just really discourage it. So Tim, I don't know if you'd be open to that as a solution to this, because I mean, would you concede that there would be situations where arguing what we call a definition might be useful?
I agree it's useful to debate definitions. I agree that. But I don't want debating the definition to be a tactic for diverting attention from the main subject.
Fair enough.
Right.
And yeah,
that's what I fear is the moment you've changed the definition and people have already expressed their opinions on what's going on with the debate, how does the system react to the fact that one of the fundamental assumptions of the debate has been changed by a separate debate?
Yeah, I
mean,
think
has
we have
been
that
changed?
issue.
No. That's a perfectly valid question, Tim. I agree. The question is, when is changing the definition a way to muddy the discussion?
But how do you change the definition? Because the definition stays the same. The fact that you can argue about definition doesn't mean that the definition changes. The definition is still immutable.
Okay.
You can just add
proposing to change
arguments.
a definition, I guess, or arguing about no, this is not the right definition, like moving the argument to the definition. But you're right. It's not a change
the
yet.
climate
It's a proposed
change.
It's a proposed change.
Yeah, but the climate change debate is a perfect case of that, where it's hard to make any ground on the debate on climate change if people keep arguing about what really is climate change.
But this is where, okay, this is where I think it becomes the tool can be used as a counter tactic, so to speak, because you can say at some point, listen, your argument here works for this definition of climate change, but not for that definition. I'm arguing about that definition, so your argument has no relevance in this context with this definition. And so it's an attempt.
That's how I see. Yeah, that's how I imagined it would be used, which is why I call them assumptions. Like the definitional claims are the assumptions around this word. You take these as being true and you don't debate them. And then you see how it shakes out in the rest of the
But it's both, right, Timothy? It is
both.
those, but at the same time, I mean, within the claim where the definition is being used, there are assumptions, and you cannot start arguing against the claim by breaking these assumptions. If you want to break the assumptions, the whole point is then you go to the definitions, And at the definitional level, you can start disagreeing there. So you really decouple the disagreement with the definition from claims that use a definition. That's the feature.
Not all assumptions are definitional. Some assumptions are, I think this is true about climate change, or empirical, whereas others are, this is what I believe climate change means. And being able to say, oh, we're not arguing about the same thing, and let's, have the debate on this space or in that space according to how we define things. And some arguments are valid in for both definitions, and others aren't. And so we know what we're talking about better, and that will clarify a lot of arguments.
I think it's a base layer and a second layer thing again. On the base layer, you can do both, but on a canonical layer, indeed, you want to say, well, this is the most widely accepted definition that you should be arguing about. I mean, it doesn't make sense if you're going to start using another definition because it's super weakly supported. There's no agreement on that one. So why don't you use the definition that everyone uses if you want to make an argument?
I don't see that as being separated into a second layer, because the canonical debate needs to be built on solid foundation. And if you're using definitions that under the covers are being debated and changed and so on and so forth,
but they're not changed, they're debated.
The layer.
Yeah, they're not changed, they're debated. I agree with you, Tim. If they're mutable, you're in trouble. But if you have both versions coexisting, and then you're saying, I'm arguing on this one or I'm arguing on this one, that's at the canonical layer. And I see why Stephen says it's a layer thing. I'm not totally on board usually, but in this case I am, because there's no empirical reason to prefer one definition to another, except at the community level. And since you want to strip the who says this and numbers game from the canonical debate, it means that the numbers game of which definition is the most widely accepted cannot really take place at the canonical debate level, or it has to exist at the layer which takes into account numbers, who uses that definition. This is the majority definition, this is the consensus definition, so other definitions get downgraded. But you cannot do that without looking at community usage and numbers.
That's what I meant when I said community, local.
Yeah.
Basically, yeah.
And it's also what I
and again, I see it totally the inverse. I see it upside down here. I'm not looking for the most common use of the word that people will most use and most accept. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for more like the way you do things in legislation and contracts, where you lay down the rules ahead of time of what you're talking about, so people can't be wishy-washy and pull things out from under you, so you can get down to the actual facts and
but that's
the
exactly
actual
what we're
reasoning
saying,
behind
Tim.
it.
We're saying the same thing.
Exactly.
I'm saying this. The notion of most accepted is a layer 2. It doesn't belong in CDL. CDL is just about, this is the definition we want to use, but somebody else will come up with another definition. And it's not, there's no reason in CDL, that's what I'm telling you, to dismiss an alternative definition. It's okay, if you want to use that term in that way, we'll have to have either a translation table or have a subspace we're arguing in that way, if that definition otherwise makes sense. Because sometimes having a different definition, and I agree, it's not a change, it's an alternate definition. And sometimes it's a useful alternate definition.
So I can see the layering in that way. But what I was hearing from Stephen is, in the base layer, all the definitions are debated.
Can be debated.
They all exist in the base layer, and you can
something that is debated is not an assumption, and I don't see definitions.
No, but it plays
working
two
when
roles.
they're not an assumption.
It plays two roles. It can be debated, but if it is debated, it doesn't have an impact on wherever the definition is being used. Wherever the definition is being used, it is an assumption, and it cannot be debated. If you want to debate the definition, you go to the definition. But the supporting and opposing arguments for the definition do not impact the claims that use it as an assumption. You support both. You just decouple them.
What does it mean to debate an assumption? Okay, go on.
No, it just, like in design terms, we're not talking about definitional claims here. Then we're talking about
maybe maybe not. I mean, it's a separate conversation.
Well, definitional claims are assumptions, right?
No.
static.
I'm saying there's two kinds of assumptions. Some are empirical, some are definitional. It's being an assumption.
Right,
But the distinction between empirical and definitional has nothing to do with being an assumption. Okay. What does it mean to define to debate a definition, right? Any definition can be used, can be proposed. The debate at some point, there is a debate which is, hey, you're not using this definition and this because you're bringing in assumptions from that other definition. And so there's a debate about relevance, which is a pure relevance thing because you're using an alternate definition which has underlying definitional assumptions, which I may say, I'm not accepting these assumptions in my definition. So it's not relevant to things how I discuss them where the assumptions are different. So that's a kind of relevance debate. And there's a totally different debate, which is which definition should we use going forward between us? And this is about agreeing to use one or the other. It's a meta debate. I don't know if it belongs in CDL at all, but there is, at some point, people in CDL have to say, okay, at this point, we're using this definition in this conversation. How the meta debate around which one do we use if there's competing definition, I don't know if that is a layer 2 thing or a layer 1 thing, because the reason to do it is usually community, which is totally a layer 2 thing. The real arguments for preferring one definition to another. There's no empirical reasons to prefer definition to another other than community adoption.
And I think you need some consensus, right, on the definition, because like if I have one claim supporting the other claim and both claims use the same word, but they use different definition,
you're
then
in trouble. And exactly, awareness of which definition we're using totally belongs in layer 1 that way. We totally need to be able to say, hey, in this claim and this claim, they're not using the same definition, something's wrong. And actually sometimes, and that's a real question, and that's a real matter of empirical debate up to a point, is I've defined things one way, you define things another way with a different set of definitional claims, if you're using definitional claims as a way to do definitions, which is what I'm proposing, but it's not being accepted yet, or some other way to do definitions, but we need a way to do definitions. But sometimes we'll have different definitions. Then the question is, are we still talking about the same thing, though we are defining it otherwise? I mean, this happens all the time in mathematics, so my examples are mathematics. There's a theorem that shows that this set of things defined with these properties is the same as that set of things, because each of the set of assumptions proves the other set, right? They're the same things, but proving that they're the same thing requires work and proof. So often you'll have different definitions that are equivalent, but agreeing that the equivalent may be a matter of debate, right? And so choosing, are we using the same set of definitions? And does it matter for the argument? Because maybe they're equivalent and maybe not. And let's argue about that. And that's a layer 1 discussion. That totally belongs in, are we talking about the same thing if we're using different definitions?
So lots to react to. One thing is, I see a need to debate somehow. I agree with the relevance. Well, relevance to me is relevant to what? I see, and yet there's a relevance to, and this is where you talk about community, but popular use of a word. If we're talking Paris, France, for example, the definition of Paris, France, and you say Paris, France is located at, and you give some coordinates that are totally wrong. Or Paris, France was founded on August 3rd, 2035, right? Again, obviously wrong.
Yeah.
Not, yeah. So there is a need to debate definitions. As you said, the definitions can be wrong in that sense. What is the purpose of debating whether or not a definition is wrong? The way I see it in the white paper vision of canonical debate is it's to remove spurious claims, because if you're given a set,
That's not what I'm talking about.
No, I know that's not what you're talking about. I'm working through some of the thinking. I see that as being a type of anti-spam, essentially. You're trying to hold a debate using words by defining the words as things nobody would understand. Like you're intentionally trying to confuse us by making up definitions, right? And confusing people.
That's a tactic.
That's one thing, right? Beyond that, I'm trying to think of what other
The
use
thing
of
is,
debating a definition,
yeah, the question of definition wrongness will happen, but is probably going to be comparatively rare, as opposed to definition. Which definition are we using? There's many of them.
but which is, again, this is the reason is that the white paper vision doesn't have a which definition are we using. It has let's use all of them. We're going to have a different debate tree for each one, right?
Yeah. No. I agree. No, I agree with that. But which definition are we using in this particular argument, right? It's you want to, as we said, say this claim support, as Felix said, this claim supports that claim. They say, oh, that's the definition I'm using, that's the definition I'm using. Oh, it's not exactly the same definition. Does it still work? Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't.
The general use case with disagreeing with definitions is really if you disagree with the claim, the only way to argue why you disagree with the claim is by arguing that the definitions being used are not the right ones. Like, I mean, the whole point is you want to go against the assumptions. You don't want to, I mean, so either you do nothing and you say, indeed, I'll talk about, like you suggest, I'll talk about my own definitions, and that's fine. I mean, we both want to support that. There's no disagreement there. But at the same time, there might also be cases where you simply want to say, well, I also disagree with that way that claim is being phrased using those definitions because it's misleading. It's indeed, it's using words that shouldn't be used in that way.
I mean, let's say critical race theory, right? Critical race theory teaches that all white people are bad. Okay, that's the claim.
That's a claim. That's a claim.
That's a claim. Okay, how are you defining critical race theory, right? And I don't want somebody, I picked a statement I don't agree with, so it's harder for me to turn it around. Okay, critical race theory does not teach that all white people are bad. Okay, and someone wants to disagree with me because they disagree with, they think that it does teach that all white people are bad, and they want to disagree with my definition of critical race theory, right?
So they can do so in the claim you just expressed.
Let me run with that a bit. It's the no true Scotsman fallacy, right? Somebody exhibits one teacher saying all white people are bad under the umbrella of critical race theory, and one other teacher saying something much more nuanced, which obviously does not imply that, and says no, some white people are perfectly fine, and still under the umbrella of critical race theory. And then what does it mean? Okay, was the claim it always teaches that? Was the claim it sometimes teaches that, and so on? But there's the no true Scotsman. Oh, this is not proper critical race theory if it says either of them, right? And this is where we get into definitional battles. This one was not proper critical race theory teacher because it used this argument that lies outside of critical race theory as defined by so and so and so. And then
so this is this is an excellent, it turns out to be, I mean, it's not a perfect example, but it's excellent in helping me understand Stephen's comment that then you move the discussion to the definition, right? This seems like a good time to move the discussion to the definition. And yet at some point, I want to be able to make some claims that say, you know, critical race theory as implemented by X person shows that it does not at all require white people to be bad or something. It does not implicate white people, right?
That's still possible, right? That's simply a different, more specific definition that hopefully
Right.
there's less agreement on.
Right.
Less disagreement.
Yeah, here I'm restricting critical race theory to critical race theory as defined by so-and-so. And that's a more precise
And in fact, that
definition.
is, you know, the critical race theory, you know, in a well-made claim would have to have a definition for critical race theory, right?
Exactly.
And
I would say using the definition of so-and-so, and this is where you cannot avoid the saying, who are reputed authors within the people who, you know, discuss critical race theory. It's important to say, you know, these are thought to be relevant authors.
Well, and I would argue the definition would arise if there's ever disagreement that shows that you want to argue about definitions, and then you
I agree
split
totally
up.
with that. I agree totally.
I think
with
we all do. But yeah, in the majority of cases, it will be very likely that you need to add a definition because, yeah.
but the interesting thing here is that I would see the debate about this coming up more within the debate around the claim, which is, for example, here's an example of what somebody said that shows this is true or shows this isn't true. And then somebody could respond to that by saying, they're not a proponent, they don't represent critical race theory or something. And that's not exactly debating the definition itself. There's a definition up there, right? You haven't moved the debate to the definition itself at that point. Now, let's say that critical race theory as defined by my teacher who says that it says all white people are bad is my definition of critical race theory. Then you have people who are like, that's not critical race theory. And so most arguments that, I mean, obviously it's a poor example because the argument is going to be, and my teacher said so, right? Is the argument in favor. It's a tautology.
Yeah, and all the
Um,
opposing arguments would be, well, there's so many other people that use this term differently, and that's how it's most commonly used. So it's definitions fighting one another, essentially.
Yeah, but then you just have, what that's going to do is muddy
No,
the debate.
I think it's extremely useful. It's saying here, the people who are quoting this empirical fact, my teacher said so, which is an empirical fact and valid, and saying, you know, it's been said by at least one person in the umbrella movement, and then saying, yes, but the
Person who introduced the term.
they're actually outside the movement because, and that does become a demographic argument. I don't think that, and that's why I'm also, you don't, a movement, a name and a movement is also what the people using it say it is, and knowing that, and we've had the example with this, we've had the example with socialism, is at this point, there's a lot of people who define socialism in a way that is totally incompatible with the way it was originally introduced and the way that, like the word of use of socialism by Bernie Sanders and associates, let's say, and Mitch McConnell and associates, and Karl Marx are three entirely incompatible definitions, right? And at some point, it's important to point out this definition, and I would say at this point, nobody cares about Karl Marx's definition because the word socialism has evolved a certain way. And what we're talking about right now is the majority understanding of people who define themselves as socialist, which I think is a more valid or more relevant, I should say, but I don't want to speak about validity, a more relevant definition than the straw man created by the adversaries. And I think it's
Right,
appropriate.
but I would see that sort of relevance coming out not in an argument about the definition, but in coming out around arguments like, you know, according to Karl Marx, this, and that, and somebody would counter that argument by saying, you know, that his definition of socialism is, well, in that case would be it's not what we mean here, right?
That's why I
Which
specialize.
means you have a mismatch of definitions at that point, right?
Yeah, and it's a relevant argument if you have the generic socialism term. It becomes irrelevant if you specialize and you add a definition, and at that point, counter arguments like that simply become irrelevant. That's what you want.
But yeah, but again, they're not definitional. You're not, yeah. That's the point, though, is you see that the arguments around relevance come around within the debate for a claim. There are arguments against the relevance of an argument. I'm still trying to visualize a clear case where we want a debate going on around a definition.
No, but what you're looking for, I think, is not what we're proposing. You're saying does it become an argument about good or bad definition, which is not what we're saying. It's about saying here this claim makes sense with this definition, but not with that definition. Let's suppose the claim didn't have a definition, right? Then we can say this claim makes sense with this definition, not with that definition, and that's a choose the right definition argument to make the claim make sense, which is a form of charity. That's one kind of argument.
Well, but I would do that as having the claim with the two different definitions.
Sure, and saying this one makes sense and this one doesn't make sense. I'm perfectly happy with that solution.
Yeah,
they're not mutually exclusive. We're suggesting doing both.
Right.
Absolutely. And then the other one, as I said, which I think is more interesting, or not, well, it's another use case, let's say, it's the question of argument matching. Two claims use different definitions. You think the definitions are equivalent, so the claims can be used one as support of the other, because the definitions are compatible, even though different. And that's a kind of arguing about the definitions. Are these definitions really compatible or equivalent, or are they equivalent in a subset, which would become another definition? You know, that's a case.
So much complexity, yeah.
But
yeah, because you could make the same argument using, you know, tons of definitions of animals or tons of definition of Paris, France. There's going to be definitions of Paris, France based on whether, you know, how you see the continuity of that city. You know, under the Republic or under, you know.
Absolutely.
And so a lot of times it doesn't matter which definition you use.
And that's why you want an entity to represent the umbrella case. Like this one, I don't care about this case. I'm talking about Paris in such general terms that these distinctions don't matter. And I'm able to speak about the umbrella definition. And in another case, well, it matters because if I'm speaking about the population at a certain date, then I want to know whether I'm speaking about within the peripheric or including the near suburbs, because it matters a lot to the demography conversation. And I need to be precise. But in many cases, either.
It seems interesting. What we're basically concluding is that the debates around definitions are not on the definitions in isolation, but always in context of where they're being used, or they should be.
That's probably true.
Except when they're contradictory, except for the validity of a definition arguments, right?
Yes, but those seem to be, like I think you were arguing, Tim, rare. That should,
I was arguing it was
spammy or something, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think there's another case where people arguing the arguments about the equivalence of definitions, I think, are another case. I mean, obviously, they're useful for a claim. but I think they're really important. I mean, as I said, my experience in mathematics is they're really important in their own right.
All right, lots to think on. I don't know if anybody else wants to bring up some more around this topic for the minutes we have left.
I think the main question we have to ask, even if we somewhat can agree now, there is some use for it, like does the complexity warrant actually supporting it? I mean, I would argue yes, but that it is a valid question to raise. Like,
I think what we've done today, and let's that be the recap a bit, is enumerate some use cases of arguing about definitions. And I think it would be actually worth writing those down, and I'll take some time for that. And then there's the other empirical questions that I raised, it won't be long, which is whether it is A, possible, B, desirable to represent definitions through a series of definitional claims, which is a separate question. But let's first go with the use cases of the kinds of definition arguments we enumerated throughout the.
Yeah, what I want to come up with, and I'll have to think through this a lot, is the perfect example for when I would want to stop and say, no, you're using the wrong definition. And yet I wouldn't want to simply, resolve that case and fork off another case and do it twice, right? That's what I'm having. I have to find that example so we can work with it, I think.
Okay, so we all have homework and call it a day.
see you tomorrow.
All right, guys, see you tomorrow.
Bye.